Thanks, Rick. Hey, everybody. I'm going to teach you a word this morning. Maybe you've not heard it, maybe you have. It's shalom. Anybody hear that word before? Okay, great. Yeah. So shalom means hello, goodbye. It's kind of like aloha, okay, if that helps at all. So I'm going to tell you about myself. But what I want to do is I want to get some notes out to you all that if I can get a couple of volunteers. What I did was I have my notes, but I created these for you. So if you have what's called a pen, we used to use those in the old days. You might want to take notes. Let's see, how does this go up? Anybody know how this is raised? Thanks, Nate. Thank you. That easy. I'm going to just get it a little higher, I guess. I don't know how high it goes. Great. Yeah, that should be fine. I think that might be max. Okay, that should be fine. So yeah, just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name's, oh great, thanks. My name's, again, Rob Werthlem, and I've been a believer now for actually, today is the 7th, right? 2 days ago was my 50th birthday, spiritually, so praise the Lord. Yeah, so I'm probably old enough to be most of your father, you know. But just a little bit about me. My folks are Holocaust survivors from Germany. Came to the United States, separate from each other. They met, they married, they were in New York. My older brother and I came along, raised conservative Jewish, went to Hebrew school. What's Hebrew school? Hebrew school is like an after-school Jewish program, like 2 days a week. And Sunday mornings, you know what? Sunday mornings, when it was time to get up to go to Hebrew school, you know what I used to do? Probably like a lot of you guys. I pulled the cover over my heads, right? I don't want to go, right? Anyway, so I went to Hebrew school, and also I had my bar mitzvah. How many of you have ever been to a bar mitzvah? Okay, 2 people, great. Yeah, so bar mitzvah is like a coming of age for a Jewish boy, okay? Girls get it also. These days, when they're 12 years old, they have what's called a bat mitzvah. Anyway, so I grew up conservative Jewish, and I'm going to talk about, in my first session, I'm going to be talking about what's Judaism, okay? Does anybody have any Jewish friends? Just curious. Great. No wonder they call us the wandering Jews. I bet you're from all over the mainland, right? And probably in some small towns. I bet some of you raised your hands. And there are actually Jewish people there, right? So we're in lots of places. So this week, what I entitled our whole week is, and it's on the top of your, or in your notes, is the Messianic Hope, exploring the Jewish roots of our faith and demystifying Jewish evangelism. So we're going to be exploring a number of different subjects, okay? The first one is today, what is Judaism? So it's basically an introductory type class. Then we're going to be talking about the feasts of Israel. And then we're going to have maybe 1 or 2 sessions on Messianic prophecy. And then a new lecture I just created. This is, by the way, my 3rd time that I'm here. So I created a new lecture for this year called Christian Sacraments and the Jewish Origins, which I think you're going to find interesting. And then I'm expecting we'll be able to talk a bit about Jewish evangelism toward the end. And I know I already asked the question, how many of you know somebody who's Jewish? What I was thinking was probably no hands would have gone up, and I would have said, you know, at least one who's Jewish. You know who that is? Exactly, Jesus. That's right. Otherwise, you could have said me as well, but I was planning on Jesus. So, anyway, and by the way, I'm going to make sure that you guys have lots of time to ask questions, okay? Because I know that you have different instructors. It's early. It's early, and I'm only, I think, the fourth person, but you're getting a fire hose of all kinds of stuff. And you know what? At the end of this week, what I want you to do is I want you to be able to bring something home with you. Take something away that's beneficial to you spiritually, okay? So, but I wanted to start off by talking about Judaism, okay? Judaism, interestingly enough, is both a religion and it's also a nationality. And someone that identifies as Jewish generally does so because of their family background. However, not all Jewish people are religiously observant. In other words, they may not attend what you might call a Jewish church or a synagogue. They may not practice Judaism in a religious sense, but at the same time, culturally speaking, they would identify as Jewish because they like lox and cream cheese on bagels, okay, if you get the idea. Jewish foods and things like that. And in a lot of cities all over, there are what's called Jewish community centers. And what those are basically is a substitute very often for people going to a synagogue. Okay, so if you can picture this, instead of religious services, a Jewish community center will have things like swimming pools, Israeli folk dancing, different things like that. So they're Jewish cultural things, and yet without the religious baggage so much, in terms of the observance, the religious observance. Now, there are three terms that are often used to describe Jewish people. They are Hebrews. You've heard that term before? Hebrews. Israelites and Jews. And the term Hebrews generally relates to somebody's ethnicity. Like when I came to faith back in 1975, a popular term for Jews who had come to faith in Jesus was Hebrew Christians. So if you see what I'm talking about, Hebrew by ethnicity, by culture and background, but by faith, Christians. Okay, so being Hebrew is generally more associated with the background, the ethnicity. For instance, prior to the Egyptian captivity, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were known as Hebrews. And the term actually means a wanderer or a nomad. And if you recall from the scriptures, God called Abram out of Ur of the Chaldeans, okay, in Mesopotamia, to a land that he was going to show him, which, of course, was Canaan, all right? And the descendants of the patriarchs then were therefore referred to as Hebrews, right? Now, the term Israelite came into existence during the Egyptian captivity, okay? You're familiar with that? 400 years of captivity in Egypt, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what happened was in Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 to 30, something really amazing happens. And why don't we turn to it for just a minute, okay? If you have your Bible, I have mine on my phone. I travel light. So Genesis chapter 32. And verses 22 to 30. Okay, and so somebody who likes to read the Bible? Okay. I'm not going to call on anybody right now, but think about it. And do you? Oh, okay, great. What version are you using? Just. Oh, great, perfect. That's what I use too. Yeah, 22 to 30.
The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He then took them and set them across the stream, and everything else he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is that? Why is that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called him the name of the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose up.
Okay, that's good. So here you see the renaming of Jacob to Israel, and the reason for it because he struggled with God and he prevailed. In fact, the name Peniel means face of God, because who did Jacob wrestle with at that point? God. And so he changed his name to Israel. Israel and other names throughout the Bible often people were named because of things that had happened in their lives, or perhaps what God had plans for them in the future. So names had a lot more significance than they do today, biblically speaking. And then the children of Jacob then became what? The children of Israel, or the Israelites. Following? Okay. Then the third term, Jew, comes from, or Jewish, comes from the descendants of the tribe of Judah, which was one of Israel or Jacob's 12 sons. And later on in history, around the time of Solomon, after Solomon's death, the nation of Israel was actually divided into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And there were 2 what are called captivities, which were basically God's judgment upon Israel for their pagan practices that they had picked up, idolatry, things like that, when they were in Canaan. And so one of the captivities was what's called the Assyrian captivity. You've heard of Assyria, okay? Assyria basically conquered the northern tribes, or the northern kingdom of Israel. Then there was a southern kingdom of Judah, which also went into a different kind of a captivity at the hands of the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar. Does that sound familiar? But in that case, the southern tribes, the southern kingdom, were able to come back from Babylon to Judah. Okay, so they were the remaining tribes, if you will, of Israel. Okay, so you have the term Jewish or Jew because those people were from what was the remaining Jewish people that came back to the land. Okay, so someone was considered to be Jewish back then in the Bible if the father was Jewish, okay? Well, we know in the scriptures, if you think about it, the Jewish people had a patrilineal line, okay, when we think of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? If you think of Jesus' genealogy, right? There's 2 of them. There's one in Matthew and there's one in Luke. And what are the majority of names in Jesus' genealogy? Were they men or women? Men. So the question is, today in modern Judaism, somebody who is Jewish generally is identified as Jewish because of their mother, not because of their father. What happened, right? Well, in modern Judaism, the explanation is that there was a lot of persecution of Jewish people over the millennia. And part of that was different things like rape and different things like that. So you didn't always know who your father was, but you knew who your mother was, is what the tradition is. So today in Judaism, a Jewish person is identified as one who has a Jewish mother rather than a Jewish father. Okay? I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to try to do this and give you a chance to ask some questions. Okay? I'm not so worried. I'm reading my notes. I don't have it all memorized too much. But I want to make sure you have enough time to ask some questions in between. Brody. Why did I go? Why did you all go to school? To learn. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, when people go to school, very often it's to learn, but it's also because it's supposed to. It's expected of them by their parents. So, but anything related to this material that I've shared so far? Anybody else have a question? Okay. You guys will warm up, I hope, because I want you to be asking questions, okay? Okay, so we're going to go on. Now, the next consideration is, what are the different Jewish religious denominations that exist today? And what are their distinctives? Well, I'm going to name a few, and they're in your notes, and if you want to, you know, take any notes next to them. There's Orthodox Judaism, and if you watch TV, if you on the internet, maybe you've seen movies, generally Orthodox Jews are pictured to be those who wear the black hats, the black coats, the white shirts. They have they're called peyut or payas, which are the hair that's like side locks on their heads. Anybody see a movie like that or show? And generally they have fringes that you notice hanging out of their clothes. The men, anyway, I'm describing. For the women, they often wear wigs. Okay, and you'd say, well, why do women wear wigs? Well, the idea was, or is, especially a married woman generally wears a wig, is because it's to make them look unattractive. Unattractive wigs? Yeah, it's to make them look unattractive to people outside of their marriage, so that when they take their wig off, the beauty of the wife is there just for a husband. But otherwise, they wear a wig that doesn't look very good. Just kind of odd stuff, you know what I mean? Anyway, the Orthodox, and by the way, there's different groups. There's Hasidic Jews, which are kind of what I'm describing right now. There's modern Orthodox. You've seen men wearing a yarmulke or kippah. It's a head covering, kind of like what the Pope wears, except they're not red. And the yarmulke is a sign of respect for God, that they wear a head covering. And that makes up about roughly 10% of the Jewish population, Orthodox Judaism. Then the next group is Conservative Judaism, which is a sect between Orthodox and Reform. We'll get to the Reform right away. And that makes up about 18% of the Jewish people today. That is the sect that I came from growing up. Then you have Reform Judaism or Reconstructionist Judaism, which is considered the more liberal side. So if you can see, you're going Orthodox, you're going middle of the road, you're getting liberal, right? And it's all about modernization and change for Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism. In other words, the Judaism of the Bible is not the Judaism we have today. Different times, different places, there's modern invention, there's all kinds of things. So it becomes more watered down, if you will. And that makes up 35% of the Jewish population today. Then you have actually the largest group, which is what would be considered unaffiliated to any of these groups, or secular Judaism, okay? And I have a question to ask everybody. It's not my notes. What do you think the country of Israel is made up of mostly today? That's right. Very good. Who said that? Cool. And your name is? Caleb. That's a good name. Very good. That's right. Secular Judaism is the largest form of Judaism in the modern state of Israel today. 90 to 95%, if you will, of the country is secular. Okay? So, and I want to mention something which I meant to mention earlier at the beginning. There's two special things going on today, okay, in Judaism. The first one is it's the festival, the beginning of the festival of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And we'll be getting into that when we talk about the Feasts of Israel a bit later on in the week. The other thing that is very important today is today's October 7th. And it's 2 years ago today that there was the invasion, the beginning of the war with the Palestinians and all of that. And that's going on today. It's the second anniversary. And thankfully, it sounds like things are starting to get figured out. But as we like to say, the only hope for peace was born in the Middle East. Okay? And we know what that is. We know who that is. It's Jesus, of course. So I thought I would mention that today. Now, any questions so far between, the things that I've shared about the different sects of Judaism? We want to give some other people a chance, Brody. Yeah.
Do they not get along with each other? Do they not like each other?
Well, it's interesting because conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism and Reconstructionists, they get along pretty well together. They recognize the fact that they're all Jewish, though different flavors, if you will. Orthodox Judaism, though, in some cases, the ultra-Orthodox and most conservative, sometimes they will not even recognize somebody who is conservative or Reform as actually being Jewish, because they're very observant in terms of the law of Moses and all of that. So if you don't keep the law, what kind of Jew are you? You're not a Jew, So the Orthodox are probably being the most extreme, are the most separate of the others. But the other ones, pretty much they get along together. Good question, though. Okay, so today, let me break this down again. So there are three forms of Judaism. There's biblical, there's rabbinic Judaism, and then there's modern Judaism, and I'll explain those a bit more too. Biblical Judaism existed up until the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D., okay? So much was involved in biblical Judaism. It revolved around the temple and the sacrificial system, those kinds of things. But with the destruction of the temple by the Romans, sacrifice came to an end. Jewish ritual basically came to an end. So biblical Judaism, in one sense, came to an end with the destruction of the temple. Then there's rabbinic Judaism. And rabbinic Judaism is what proceeded after the destruction of the temple. Think about it for a minute. There was a dilemma. So much revolved around the temple, right? So life revolved around the temple. Worship revolved around the temple in Jerusalem. What do we do now, right? So with the destruction of the temple, what became known as rabbinic Judaism really came into its own. And it came out of Pharisaic Judaism, okay? You know about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all of that, right from the New Testament. Well, Pharisaic Judaism really came into what we call rabbinic Judaism, okay? And they changed a lot of things, whereas, rather than having blood sacrifices, for instance, Rabbinic Judaism said, well, by prayers, our lips become like calves. So when we pray, our lips are a sacrifice unto God in terms of our prayer. I mean, different things like that. So a reinterpretation, if you will, of what biblical Judaism was in order to substitute for what could no longer be done, okay? And then the third one was modern Judaism, okay? And that really came into its own during the Enlightenment period in Europe. And that would have been, just for your information, 1685 to about 1815. Now today, what you should recognize here is that Judaism isn't really based so much on the Bible anymore. Especially Rabbinic Judaism, it's based more on what's called the Talmud. Anybody hear that term before? The Talmud? The Talmud are actually the oral traditions and interpretations of the leaders of the Jewish people. So the Talmud, it's also known as the oral law. So the tradition goes, in addition to the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law that was given to Moses, what we call the Torah, or the 5 books of Moses, in addition to that, God gave Moses an oral law as well. Basically, the traditions, the interpretations, I should say, of the written code. Now, think about that for a minute. What would that do for rabbis then if they said that the Talmud is the oral traditions, the oral law passed down through Moses and ultimately to us? What do you think that would do for rabbis, for instance, today? In terms of authority. What's that? I'm sorry, I still didn't hear my hearing. No, it's what it is. It gives rabbis the authority. Maybe that's what you said and I missed it. Repeat it again. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, like if it's the oral law, then I guess the rabbis wouldn't really need to speak or have authority.
Well, no, it's what it is that it gives a rabbi's authority, so that anything that rabbis say today, or a lot of what rabbis say, is like it came down from Mount Sinai, just like the written law. Just like Pharisees, if you think about it for a minute, what was the problem with the Pharisees and Jesus? No, I'm asking a question, then I want to take it. So what was the problem between Jesus and the Pharisees and the arguments that went on? They added to the law. That's right. And Jesus disputed their authority because they put themselves, as he said at one place, in the place of Moses. Okay? So you see the problem with the Talmud or the oral law. Now, what's your question, Brock?
So was any of their oral law written down, or is all passed down by
Brock was asking if it's written down. Yes, the Talmud is written down. But there's always additional things that can be added to it, okay? And so let me give you a really simple example of what's in the Talmud. Okay, first of all, in Genesis, one of the kosher laws that are taken from the book of Genesis, actually, which is in the oral law in the Talmud, is you're not supposed to eat meat and dairy at the same meal. That there has to be a period of 4 to 6 hours between eating meat and dairy. Okay, separation of milk and dairy. From that tradition or that interpretation, what's come out is that now Orthodox families and ultra-Orthodox families, they might have 2 sets of dishes, maybe even 3. We're not talking about Passover. Passover with the absence of leaven. We'll talk more about Passover in another day. So Orthodox Jews will often have 3 sets of dishes, okay? Because you don't want to risk your dish that you're eating off of having dairy on it if you're eating meat. See that? Now, all of this came about, and this is, we're talking Orthodox here. This all came about from a simple law that God gave, which was you're not supposed to boil a kid in its mother's milk. Where did that come from, right? A kid is a goat. And a pagan practice was that they boiled their kids, their goats, in their mother's milk, which was an abhorrent kind of a thing. I mean, the pagans, they even sacrificed their own children to their idols and stuff like that. So God gave this law in order to keep the Israelites, the Jewish people, separate from the surrounding nations. So from that simple law, you see what happened? All of a sudden, and that's just dishes. I didn't tell you that the Orthodox, sometimes they'll even have separate kitchens. Doesn't that amaze you? From a simple law like that. Where did it come from? Did God say you're supposed to have 3 sets of dishes, separate dishes? You're supposed to have 2 separate ovens or kitchens? No. Where is that? It's in the written oral law. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, modern Judaism encompasses the various forms of Jewish practice and belief that developed from the 18th century, the Enlightenment, to the present, influenced by, as I said, the Enlightenment and changing social and political landscapes. So again, the key movements are Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, each offering a distinct approach to engaging with modernity while maintaining Jewish identity and tradition. And so here are the key aspects of each of them. I'll start with Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism emphasizes individual autonomy and social justice, adapting Jewish practices to modern sensibilities. And as I said, it's the most liberal of all the mainline denominations. Okay? Let me know if I'm going too fast. And, you don't have to write everything down, but Conservative Judaism seeks to balance tradition and modernity, maintaining a commitment to Jewish law while allowing some degree of adaptation. Okay, is that making sense so far? Orthodox Judaism strives to uphold traditional Jewish law and practice with modern Orthodox branches that still engage with secular culture and intellectual life. So they are very religious, but yet they still relate to the rest of the world. No problem with that. But then you have what's called, and I mentioned it earlier, the Haredim, or Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And it's kind of like you think of the Amish, for instance. You know about the Amish, right? They seem very kind of old century, backward, whatever, very, very traditional. Haredi Judaism is very similar to that. More conservative, more insular, meaning they keep to themselves and they maintain a distance from the secular world. And then there's what we call Jewish philosophy, which is, modern Jewish thinkers having grappled with integrating Jewish tradition with modern philosophical and social thought. Okay, obviously that's going to be very liberal also. Now, one last area, because I'm mindful of time and everything, that I want to talk about with this is life cycle events. Okay, you know what a life cycle event is, right? What are some life cycle events you can think of? Being born. Very good. That's the first one. Any others? Okay, well, yeah, to some degree that is, yeah. Sorry, birthdays, okay. Anything else? Marriage, that's right. Right on, Brock. So, the first event that was mentioned is when a male child is born. There is a ceremony that's named as the Brit Milah that's conducted. Now, there's a Yiddish term, and that's a whole other story. What is Yiddish? It really formed in Eastern Europe. It's a language. It's kind of related to Hebrew, but it's kind of a mixed language where there's some Hebrew in there, some German, Polish. It's kind of a real mix, amalgamation. And so the term, instead of a brit, is bris. Maybe you've heard that term before, bris. Now, what does the term bris or brit mean? It means covenant. Now, think back in the Bible to Genesis. What did God command Abraham to do with his firstborn son? And even himself? Circumcision. Exactly. And that's what the Brit Milah is. On the 8th day after a male child is born, they have circumcision. Okay. And so at that point, the male child enters the covenant that God had made with Abraham. And for girls, we don't want to leave them out, this is a time when it's a naming ceremony. Usually at 12 years old, actually that's not at 12 years old, they're named early on. But there's the bat mitzvah, which is at 12 years old. But there isn't really that much that goes on for a girl after they're born. And, you know, it makes sense because in the book of Genesis, there really isn't anything said about what to do with a daughter at that point. Okay? The second one, which I mentioned just now, kind of, the second life cycle event is the bar or the bat mitzvah. And again, it's a tradition. You know, if you were to look in the Old Testament, you're not going to find a bar or a bat mitzvah. Even in the New Testament, you don't see anything. The closest thing you might see, when Jesus was 12 years old, what did he do? Anybody remember? He went to the temple and he was teaching. So there's some people that say, well, maybe that was kind of a bar mitzvah. I think that's a stretch. But there's really nothing in the Bible that talks about a bar or a bat mitzvah. And by the way, the difference, bar means son of, so son of the covenant, and bat means daughter of the covenant. Okay, so bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, 13 for a man or a boy, and 12 for a girl. All right. And in Judaism today, the idea of that is it recognizes the maturity of that 13 or that 12-year-old. For boys, when you have your bar mitzvah, technically, it's said that you can lead a service in synagogue at that point. Okay? So you become a man. And for a girl at the age of 12, you become a woman at that point. You're recognized by the community as an adult. And again, I think one or two of you raised your hands that you've gone to a bar mitzvah. Yeah? Did somebody? What's that? Oh. Well, before you do, Brody, I want to hear what your experience was when you went to bar mitzvah. What's your name? Jared. What was your experience, Jared?
So it was my friends. They invited me, and it was a boy, and it was kind of just a celebration.
Did you go just to the party, or did you go to the ceremony as well? Okay.
It was like 6 years ago.
It's a long time ago. Okay. Yeah, usually what happens is, like in my case, when I had my bar mitzvah, and most cases, you have that in the synagogue. It's a religious ceremony and all. You come up to the lectern, you read from the Torah, you chant what's called a Torah and a Haftarah passage. The Torah passage is from the law, from the 5 books of Moses, and the Haftarah is from the prophets. Okay, so there's a religious ceremony at the synagogue, but then there's a party afterwards. Sometimes it's right at the synagogue in the what we would call a fellowship hall, but a lot of times it's in another location like a catering place or whatever, where people gather, they party, they have dinner, whatever, food. So, yeah, Brody. Sorry. Yeah, you're raising your hand. Caleb. What is what? Good question. The Torah is actually what we call the 5 books of Moses. Okay, so it's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Okay, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And traditionally, and I believe it's true according to the scriptures, is Moses wrote down the 5 books. Oh, the Talmud. The Talmud was written by many different Jewish elders, people that had a reputation, the wise men, if you will. And it's, at one time, now of course, you could have the whole Talmud on your phone. But at one time it was said that you'd fill up a room with the number of volumes that there are of the Talmud. Okay, but written down by men. Okay. So great. So we know a little bit more about the bar mitzvah. Now the third event, which I don't know, did anybody mention this one? What do you think the third life cycle event is? Marriage, that's right. And the couple that's getting married generally signs what's called a ketubah. Ketubah, I think it's in your notes. It's a marriage contract. And that's a part of the ceremony, a part of the occasion, to remind the couple of their moral responsibilities to each other. And has anybody ever gone to a Jewish wedding? Or has anybody ever seen, maybe on, in a film or, online or anything? What does a Jewish wedding look like? When you, sorry, yes. I can't see your name. Anna. Yeah, Anna, right, sorry. We talked last night.
The only thing I know is the breaking glass.
Right, that's part of it. Yeah. And do they get married outside? Is there anything about what it looks like, are they just standing before a preacher or a rabbi, or what does it look like? If you look at the couple up front, is there anything surrounding them? Okay. Okay. What they are married under is a chuppah. Okay? A chuppah. And what is a chuppah? It's a canopy. Okay? And it symbolizes the establishment of a new Jewish home through the marriage. And then, as you said, Anna, the groom breaks the glass. Generally, it's wrapped up. It's like a wine glass or something like that, soft. And the reason why they do that is it symbolizes the destruction of the Second Temple. Now you wonder, why in the middle of a marriage ceremony do you do that? The reason is, in the midst of the joy of this couple coming together and beginning a new Jewish family, there is the remembrance, the sadness of the destruction of the temple as well in the midst of it. It's not like good luck or anything like that. It's just, it's a part of the ceremony typically. And then there's one last life cycle event. What do you think? Death. That's right. One that we don't like to talk about a whole lot, right? But when somebody dies that's Jewish, generally there is a 7-day period of mourning when a death occurs. And that period is called Shiva, which, surprisingly enough, it's a number in Hebrew. What do you think the number is? 7, exactly. And it's a time when those in mourning receive visitors to come and to comfort them, and to reminisce about the person who's died. Visitors are often going to bring meals to those in mourning. And then after that 7-day period, there's another 11 months of mourning. And there's a daily reciting of a Jewish prayer which is called Kaddish. And that's usually said by the son for the parents, and it's generally to honor them. So every day throughout this 11-month period, Kaddish is said. Another thing that's done is, and this goes back again to Europe, it's not, none of these things, well, the Shiva and the 11-month period of mourning is part of the scriptures, but there are certain traditions that are not, like for this one, a Yahrzeit candle is something that I believe started in Germany. Anybody, any German scholars here? Anybody ever take German? Okay. So what would Yahrzeit mean, Mariella?
I know that means time.
Sorry?
I know Zeit means time,
Right.
but I don't know.
Yar? Year. Right. So it's a time of year when the person died. And so every year on the date that the person has died, the parent has died, for instance, a Yahrzeit candle is lit, which burns for a 24-hour period. And again, it's to remind and to honor the person that has died. Okay, and that's every year. So with my parents, for instance, who thankfully, my parents came to faith in Jesus, just like my older brother, who was first in our family. But every year, you know, both my parents have gone to be with the Lord. And so every year on the date of their death, I'll light a Yahrzeit candle as well. My wife as well, Sandy. So anyway, I know I've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but we have about, what, 5 minutes time? I hope I'm on time. If anybody has questions, and don't be shy, you know. We're all I hear people are telling me you're all family, right? So you shouldn't be. You know what? The other night, the first night when we got in, Sandy and I were jet lagged. I know Darren might have mentioned that to you. And guess what? None of you were shy that night. Anyway, but you know, don't be embarrassed. You know, does anybody have a question or a thought? Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, you said 90 to 95% of Israel is like just a secular like branch. Is there like a particular reason for that?
You know, I would have to say that in Israel and in a lot of parts of the world, Judaism has looked back to the Holocaust as a question mark on why would God allow these 6 million Jewish people to have died, suffered and died, and the displacement of the Jewish people. I'd have to say that for many Jewish people, not just in Israel, but even in other places around the world, people have become atheists or agnostics, because if God were a loving God and he were really committed to us, then how could he have let this happen? So therefore, because it did happen, how would you relate to that? saying, well, you know what, if God's like that, I don't want to know him. You know, and I would say to a large degree, secular Judaism is probably in part because of that. You know, so I hope that helps somewhat. Now, the religious, on the other hand, in Israel, it's a small amount, but they have a huge amount of power. And the reason is in the government. And the reason is because coalition government, which means you have various parties that have to agree with one another and elect a prime minister. So even if the religious party is on the smaller side and the number of religious people are smaller in Israel, they hold a huge amount of power because the government can't exist without their being there. So if any of you have ever gone to Israel, if you haven't, go sometime. From Friday late afternoon through Sunday night, public transportation stops. Why? You're not allowed to travel on the Sabbath or a certain distance on the Sabbath according to the scriptures. But what about the 95% who are secular? That it doesn't make a difference to them. They're under that control still of the Orthodox. So they have a lot of power in the government. I know I gave you a little more than you needed, but hopefully that's helpful. Yeah. And then I think we have time for one more. Did you raise your hand? Did somebody raise their hand? Okay, yeah. What's your name? I can't see it back.
Tucker.
Okay, Tucker.
Do you think or believe that the Israelites that were wandering in the wilderness, do you think they were believers?
When you say believers, what do you mean exactly?
They have faith? Because I feel like they just rejected God the whole time.
Yeah. Well, you know what? How many Christians do you know that are wandering in the desert right now, too? That, you know, I would say that repeatedly God showed miracles to them. You know, they came out of Egypt and all of that. And what did they keep doing? Rebelling against God. When Moses was getting the 10 Commandments, right, up at Mount Sinai, what was some of the people doing? Building the golden calf. You know, so it's kind of like just repetition throughout the generations. But what's really cool about this whole thing is God continued to honor his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, despite the continuous rebellion. See? And that's the same thing for us as believers in Jesus, too. That we may fail God, but he never fails us. He's always there waiting for us to come back to him and to repent and to turn from our wicked ways and turn back to him. He's always a loving Father willing to have us back. In the case of the Israelites, this is before Jesus, and I would say that there were people of faith. You know what? Who were the only two that survived when the rest of that generation that left Egypt? Okay, who were the only two people that survived that generation that didn't die out in the wilderness? Remember? Joshua was one, and then there's somebody sitting in this room that has that other name. Caleb, that's right. They were the only two from that generation that left Egypt that survived. And why is that? Their faith in God was different than the faith of all of those people that left Egypt. Because that whole generation died out, and the children were the ones that came into the promised land, into Canaan. So anyway, I think that I'm out of time. But you know what? Sandy and I will be around at meal times and stuff. I'm going to be teaching again at 11. And the next one I'm going to be doing is, let's see. I'm going to be teaching on, oops. I'll tell you later. Actually, sorry. I'm looking at your notes. That doesn't help me. Anti-Semitism. Okay? So we'll talk about anti-Semitism a little later. And that's really going to tie in a lot to what's going on today in Israel and over the centuries. Okay? So have a good break, and I'll see you back at 11. Stop. Sure. Come over here.
So, most of Judaism is made up of the Bible. Call yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a Jewish Christian.